Hi. Did anybody wake up in a post-human state this morning? Is that a no? I'm going to put a couple of words in you guys' heads today. The first word is parasociability. Now, when I talk about parasociability, I tend to annoy people. But when I talk about parasociability, people immediately think, oh, that's like a haunted house. That's like a Yeti, right? And though we have plenty of haunted houses and plenty of Yeti here in East Texas, when I talk about parasociability, I'm talking about building relationships with people whom we see on television. And it's within the confines of our minds. We are able to identify with these people. We're able to empathize and sometimes sympathize with characters in the different scenarios that people fall into when we see them on television. And by people on television, I'm referring to TV characters. I'm talking about fictional characters. I'm talking about real characters, such as politicians, whom we'll probably never meet in our real lives. I'm talking about sports athletes, anybody that we see on television whom we're not likely to come into contact with in the course of our everyday life. That's what I mean by parasociability, our ability to kind of link up with people and things we see on television. Now, transhumanism. Transhumanism, some of you guys are probably familiar with this movement. This is an international and an intellectual movement aimed at using technology to improve the human condition. And I'm referring to things like improving our cognitive abilities, our psychological abilities, even our physical abilities through different types of technology. And there's a lot of different technologies out there. And I'm going to talk about one big one today. That is the garden variety television set. Well, let's back up. Let's go back in time for a second. The invention of the alphabet changed how we communicate with each other. It allowed us to communicate across space and across time. Later on, we had the printing press came out, and it started producing all kinds of different materials. Printed materials ran all over the place, especially during the colonial days of the United States. And with this proliferation of printed materials, what happened? We had a spike in literacy rates. Suddenly, most of the world, or a lot of the world, was incredibly literate and able to communicate with each other through means beyond interpersonal means. Then in the last century, what happened? Television came out. I love television, if you can't tell. Television came out. And television has been criticized as fleeting images, for one thing. We have fast-paced plots. We have varieties of different characters and plots and kind of unnatural situations sometimes. One of the big criticisms of TV is this. It forces institutions such as government, education, religion, and other institutions that have been with us for hundreds, possibly thousands of years. It forces these institutions to kind of take on a show-busy appearance. This means that to compete for audiences and to compete for attention, institutions must be able to compete with television. So, I want to jump for a second into our imaginary social worlds. Television contributes to our imaginary social worlds. But what do I mean by imaginary social world? I'm talking about our imagination. This is the place in our head that we use to do functional things. We use the place in our heads to figure out, how am I going to get out of bed tomorrow, get dressed, and get to school? We think, well, what am I going to tell the boss when he finds out I'm 10 minutes late? We use this imaginative social world in our head to do basically, very functional things, very mundane functional things. Now, television is a huge part of our imaginary world. Now, in various countries, people's imaginary social worlds will be filled with things like gods, goddesses, angels, demons, mythical creatures, pretty much anything you can imagine. In America, though, our heads are full of TV people. They could be people, it could be politicians, athletes, TV characters, pretty much anybody. These are the people that fill our imaginary social worlds along with the real people that we come into contact with. Now I'm going to tell you a stat, and I want you guys to let it sink in for a second. The Bureau of Labor Statistics put out a report 2 years ago that said, basically what it said is that interpersonal communication for leisure purposes among Americans is a functional alternative to television viewing. That's right. Interpersonal communication for leisure time as an activity is second to TV. We like TV more than we like talking to each other. Now, whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, that's something for another TED Talk. But that's how it is. This is what the stats are telling us, is that we spend more time with the screen than we do in interpersonal conversation with other people for fun. So, knowing this, knowing that we've got screens, I see a screen right here. I've been tweeting. Other people have been tweeting. We've got screens all over the place. We've got to ask this question. We've got to ask, how are media effects changing? We have a century of research that tells us about different media effects and elaborates on different theories and things like that. But we've seriously got to start asking this question, how are media effects changing? How are they different today than they were 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago? Well, I got some ideas about that. First off, as human beings, one of the things we do is we scan our environments. We look around for cues. We look around for people. We look around for things that are going to give us an idea of what we're supposed to be doing, how we're supposed to be behaving, what we're supposed to be thinking. We just get up all these cues and we kind of put them together in our mind and say, okay, I should be doing this or I should be doing that. Now, part of that imaginary social world revolves around social comparison. We're also comparing ourselves constantly with other people. We may say, oh, this person has more money than I am, or this person has more education than I have, or this person's better off than I am. And we start doing this upward comparison thing, and we start feeling a little bit worse about ourselves. We do this with TV characters too. Now, other times we might downwardly compare ourselves with other people. We might say, oh, well, that person, I wouldn't want to be in their situation, or that person is worse off than I am. And sadly, we end up feeling better about ourselves. This is what the research says. When we do a downward social comparison with other people, we feel better about ourselves. That's how it works. We're humans. But there are some people out there that are so different from us that we cease to compare ourselves with them. We stop comparing ourselves with them because there's really no point, because we think, oh, this person is categorically different from myself. These people we might categorize people as terrorists or Satanists or polygamists. It could be any label for people whom we consider so different from ourselves that it's not even worth comparing ourselves with them. And as a result, we end up with things, we stop communicating with them. We end up with things like racism, prejudice, things of this nature. But we also know that through social contact with people whom we deem to be categorically different from ourselves, through social contact and interaction, we end up getting rid of things like racism and prejudice. These things tend to melt away. The stereotypes we hold for groups different from us, different outgroups, tend to melt away, and eventually we end up with like diversity and social cohesion and some really good friends. We also know this. Social contact does this, but so does parasocial contact. That means by seeing people categorically different from ourselves on TV, we can also erode prejudice and racism and some of those uglier things about us that tend to make us human. Parasocial contact. Here's my evidence. Researchers, they took subjects, or human beings, and they showed them episodes of Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. Well, first let me tell you about the shows. Will and Grace debuted in 1998. It was a show involving prominently homosexual characters who were portrayed in a very positive light, and they got into all kinds of wacky and fun situations. Queer Eye for the Straight Guy came out in 2003. And I remember watching this show. The Fabulous Five, whom you see up here on the screen, would come around to slobs like me, and they'd show me how to comb my hair, how to dress, how to wear my clothes, how to clean my house, how to cook, how to behave in public, how to do all kinds of things. These shows were hits. They were incredible hits. Researchers took these shows and they showed them to their human subjects, and over a course of 3-4 months, a semester, they found out that as a result of watching these types of shows, that their human subjects exhibited much more tolerance to gays and homosexuality as a result of having seen these shows. So that's what's going on. I mean, we've got hard data, hard research showing that these shows up here have led to an increase in tolerance for what things that were once considered taboo. Now, where are we now? 10 years later, we're talking about equal rights. We're talking about non-discrimination based on people's sexual preferences or sexual orientation. We're talking about same-sex marriage. Several states have legalized same-sex marriage. In Texas, we haven't legalized same-sex marriage, but we're having the conversation. That may be the most important part about all this. We're having the conversation about people's rights. And that's important. And that's a profound impact for a television show to have. Now, I've got more evidence for you. Check this out. 2006, the television show Big Love debuted on HBO. 2010, Sister Wives on the Learning Channel. These shows feature polygamous families, and they're big families. The patriarchs, the men have 3 to 4 wives, lots of kids. And the characteristic of these shows is that they show us the frustrations and anger and the difficult things that people have to do just to be members of a family. And I don't know about you guys, I've got a 2-year-old, I've got a 5-month-old, and I've got a wife, I've got a mother, and I've got a family. And this is stressful. I can identify with what's going on with these polygamists, and I to be honest, I feel sorry for men that have that much that they have to deal with. But that's just me. It works great for them. It works great. So where are we now with polygamy? We've had about 6-7 years of polygamy shows being shown on different networks. Where are we with it now? Polygamy, the argument for polygamy for it to be legal is pretty much the same basic arguments as the same-sex marriage argument. That is, that people should be able to marry and live with whom they want. Last month, Utah repealed its cohabitation law. This effectively legalized the various polygamous situations going on in Utah. It made people able to live legally in their own household with the people whom they love. Now, is America ready for polygamy? Not yet, but if this follows the same path as it followed with the Queer Eye for the Straight Guy and Will and Grace, we may be onto a path to completely new arrangements for marriage, new ideas of what marriage is meant to be. So, one other piece of evidence I want to throw out. Researchers at the University of Maryland recently attributed a drop in teen pregnancy to MTV's 16 and Pregnant. And this show goes around that shows young teenage women pregnant. And as a result, lots of statistical things, and they've figured out that this show is in part responsible for a drop in teen pregnancy rate. So, through our parasocial processing of television characters, we end up seeing people and things that we're not generally accustomed to. Things become normalized, and we start identifying, we start linking up with these people cognitively. We start empathizing, sympathizing with these people, and as a result, it tends to erode our stereotypes of what these people, the stereotypes that we hold for people whom we consider categorically different from ourselves. Parasociability is a human trait. My own research has demonstrated that parasociability, different people have different levels of parasociability. Some people have high levels of the trait, others have lower levels of the trait. And what this basically means is, well, some people are better at watching TV than others. Any good watchers of television? I see a few hands go up. Okay, so parasociability is a trait, and it's through this trait that we can end up eroding stereotypes of people who are different from us. So, knowing that parasociability erodes these stereotypes, I argue that the television, the garden variety television, is an engine of transhumanism. I love that word. It's an engine of transhumanism that is eventually going to help transform our social condition and take us into a condition in which we're much more tolerant, much more loving of other people, and much better people all around. Thank you.